emerging literary artists.
Hello, hello, hello. Things are just happening.
Yeah, that's all.
And I'm glad for it, because I'd rather be having something happen than not happen. So thank you all for coming out. Give it up for VOCL for making a reading of fiction happen on the south side of Chicago. Big up for that, because I was tired of going way up north just for this fiction. And also with the box, make sure you drop something in there. You don't necessarily have to, give it to me, because this organization, they need as much support as they can get. You can meet me across the street and buy me a drink. So CP, you all keep that money, so you can do this great work. So this is the book. It's a collection of 12 short stories. Working on these stories for about 6.5, maybe 7 years. Long time. So back in the Columbia days, workshopping these stories. September should be the release date. This is a galley proof. It's a really nice galley proof. So this is the actual cover. So on the inside, it's all marked up and highlighted and everything like that. So if you hear me pausing, it's because I'm trying to read through some corrections. All right. So the story that I'm going to read is called God's Precious Love. Right? So with everything that's happening with situation with police brutality and so on and so forth, I wanted something a little light for me. Because my boy, Takuma, he's not here, he had to leave. We were talking about it. It's like sometimes it gets to be a little bit much with Facebook and Twitter. You get inundated with videos every other day or every day about somebody getting beat down. And I said, you know what, I just want a story that's going to help me unplug. So I tapped into this one because it's two of my best friends, Jimmy and Jonas. And these guys are like comic relief for me. If you want to picture them, this is how I see them. I see them, imagine Bernie Mac and Samuel Jackson drinking Crown Royal on a Friday night, listening to Bobby Womack, bringing it back to the music. It's a lot of cussing, and if you from Chicago, you know there's no cussing like Southside. 63rd Street, 79th Street, cussing. So you'll hear a little bit of language here. So here's the context of the story. Jimmy and Jonas, two best friends, they got a little bit of an addiction problem. They find themselves fresh in from Minnesota, staying in a men's shelter, and they're trying to figure out their next move. All right? There was a deep funk that lived in the men's shelter known as God's Precious Love. It would walk from the floorboards and creep around the shelter like a specter. As much as the administrators tried to disinfect the place, the funk always remained. The antiseptic smell from the pine saw only made it worse. Jonas tried to block out the smell in the symphony of snores, farts, and creaking bed springs. He hated life in the shelter, but it was the only place he and his best friend Jimmy could find. For 10 years, the two had lived in Minneapolis, but the stone-cold hand of fate had driven them from there. They had to leave all of their things behind and catch the first thing smoking out of town. They could have picked any place in the nation's land, but being creatures of habit, they came back to the only other home they knew, Chicago. When they first got back, they stayed with old friends and fans that still remembered their music and admired it. But lately their charm had run thin. They weren't able to talk themselves into an old partner's basement for the night. They had long ago seen many of their bridges burned. Such was the life of a lying dope addict. The brown bitch had laid claim to Jonas' soul a long time ago. As much as he tried to fight it, her kiss was too sweet. The dreams that came after she slid that good thing on him was too pure. But invariably, when the high would evaporate, he would be greeted with the smash of reality like a brick to the face. His music career, money, and self-respect were all pissed down the drain. There were times when he would come up from a nod and feel the cold brass of his sax against his fingertips, but none too lately. It took great concentration to will away the ghost of his past potential. It was easier just to accept what he knew, what was truly present. The bright red neon cross that hung on the front of the shelter was lit 24/7 and burned right outside the window of Jonas's bunk. Underneath the cross it read, "God's precious love shelters men from the evils of the world." Even though they had been at the shelter for a few weeks, Jonas would stop and stare at the cross and read the same over and over before Jimmy would call out to him. Jonas gave up sleep and just stared up at the ceiling. The light of the new day crept over the windowsill, and Jonas placed his hand into the spill of primrose light. He wiggled his fingers and thought about how hot it would be later that day. "Same shit, different day," he whispered and rolled over. He could already feel the hunger rising up from his bowels. It would soon set his flesh aflame, and he would do whatever it took to douse it. As bad as God's precious love was, it was like the Ritz-Carlton compared to the other flop houses and transient hotels he and Jimmy had stayed in. It had 3 large bathrooms on each floor. Each bathroom had 7 urinals and 7 stalls plus a shower area. In most shelters, there was just 1 shower for 500 people to use. The lines were so long that half the day would be gone before you got a liquid soap on your ass. He sighed deeply and looked out over the long, narrow dorm room and the rows of men in beds. Just then, a long stretch of shadow passed over the wall, 20 feet in front of him. The men of God's precious love weren't exactly motivated to get out of bed until they absolutely had to. He lifted his head and looked left to see who had risen so early. After a moment, Jonas recognized the source of the shadow. It was a fool named Leotis. He was creeping near Jimmy's bunk. Leotis was nothing but a thieving bastard. Jonas knew that. He rose a bit higher to see what his monkey ass was up to. Jonas sat up slowly and slid from the bunk to the floor. The guy on the bottom bunk stirred. Jonas saw Leotis reach down into Jimmy's pants, which hung on the post of his bunk. Jonas took a few quick steps and listened. For the squeak of wood he expected. When he heard nothing, he kept stepping, hoping Leotis wouldn't turn around. Jonas's nostrils flared and his eyes were bulging. The hot sun was now filling the room. A slice of heat was right on his neck, and he moved 6 more steps closer. Leotis slipped his hand into Jimmy's pocket. A tidal wave of boiling water crashed inside of Jonas. Only 10 feet now. A few more steps. Squeak. Leotis turned and stared right at Jonas with eyes bulged. Leotis bit his lower lip and eased his hand out of Jimmy's pants. Before Leotis could open his mouth, Jonas crossed the distance between them. He spun his body like a top and let his fist fly. The sound of a melon being slapped with a baseball mitt went up in the dorm. Leotis' head snapped to the side and he caved like a building during demolition. One dude let out a hoop. Jonas stood over the crumpled body of Leotis as the men of God's precious love cheered Jonas. Jimmy sat up quickly. "What's happening?" "Just get your shit before Forte come up here," Jonas said. Jimmy shook his head. Forte, oh no. He already told us if we got into one more infraction, he was going to put us out. Get your stuff, I said. Jimmy put together what had happened when he saw Lee Otis lying on the floor like a baby rocked to sleep. Jimmy got up and grabbed his pants and felt for his wallet. I never liked his monkey ass anyway. Boom! The metal door that led to the stairs had been thrown open. Forte was on the scene. He was the program director of the shelter. He was 7 feet tall and heavy as a gang of cows. He was also as mean as a clan meeting at midnight, and he loved the sight of blood and the taste of tears. The sound of his size 14 boots thudded as he came up the stairs. Suddenly, grown men turned into weak little girls and scattered like mice. They ran for the back stairs, jumping over the lump that was Lee Otis. Jonas felt the floor shaking, and like some old and rusted engine with its gears grinding together, they heard Forte's voice. It sounded like grumbling that was coming straight from the pit of hell. Those grinding gears ramped up and accelerated until Jonas could make out syllables, then words. What the hell's the problem? Forte let out. You all acting like loose monkeys again? I gotta make y'all behave? There he stood, deaf and calm. He filled the doorframe with his massive body. His black skin shined like leather from all the Vaseline he put on his face. He stepped into the room and Jimmy swallowed hard. Who the hell is this? Forte said. He used his large sandy brown work boot covered with dark red splotches to roll Lee Otis's body over. Somebody done knocked Lee Otis the hell out. It had to be you. He bellowed, looking at Jonas. How you know I didn't find him like that? Jonas's voice shook. Because you got a time bomb in your head, ready to go off at any time. You quit the slapper fool. I know your type. But like I told your monkey ass when you and this broad of yours got here, he said, flicking his thumb at Jimmy. I'm the king and ain't nobody gonna be knocking nobody out around here but me. Put your shoes on, nigga. I'm tired of y'all. Jimmy quickly stuffed his feet into his gym shoes. Forte was the craziest fool Jonas had ever seen, and here he was, helping to run a shelter. Story was, he used to be homeless, and the executive director, Mr. Samuels, was scared to put him out. He was taking people's dinners, smashing them across the head with trays, and just generally being an asshole. Mr. Samuels finally got the courage to kick his crazy ass out, but Forte just smiled as Samuels hemmed and hawed around. You know why they kicked me out of juvie hall when I was a youngster? He asked as Samuels just shook his head slowly. It's 'cause I burned half that motherfucker down. They said Samuel's hairline jumped back a few inches when he heard that. He loved God's precious love, and he knew Forte was crazy enough to do it. So he just hired him on as part of the staff, and the maniac had been there ever since. Forte got up on Jonas and looked down into his eyes. Forte's face turned into a mass of wrinkles and creases. His eyebrows pitchforked up, and you could see his temples pulsate in and out like accordions. He opened and closed his fists rapidly, making his veins sit up on his arms like pissed off cobras. Jimmy closed his eyes and sent up the best prayer he knew. Lord, have mercy, he whispered. Forte grabbed each of them by the collar and dragged the grown men to the top of the stairwell as if they were satin dolls. Come on now, Forte, don't be like this. Jimmy let out. I was just protecting his stuff. We ain't do nothing. Forte held them over the top of the stair, over the edge of the top stair, and with a laugh that chilled Jonas's bones, he pushed them down the stairs. They howled and moaned, rolling over one another, head over heels like socks tossed in a dryer. Then with a thundering jolt, they slammed into the concrete floor of the foyer. Good for them, there was only one flight of stairs. Jimmy was just a hump of flesh, and Jonas looked like a pile of pickup sticks. Before they could catch their breath, they were wrenched up and thrown outside. Thank God I've been taking them anger management classes. Who knows what would have happened to y'all, Forte laughed. He pulled up his sagging pants and stood right over them and continued. Rule number 2 of God's precious love is no fighting, no exceptions. The both of you was out. Come round back at 5 and I'll have duty. Set your shit out. And that's 5 on the dot, because at 5:01, you know the vultures don't pounce all over it. And then he turned his wide State Street back to them and walked back inside. Jonas stood slowly and picked Jimmy up. The morning business crowd of downtown Chicago flowed around and moving quickly so as not to catch whatever disease they thought Jimmy and Jonas had. Jonas dusted himself with his free hand and shook Jimmy with the other. Man, are you okay? It took Jimmy a few seconds, but he finally spoke. Are we alive? He asked, bewildered. What you think? Jimmy panned around. His wide eyes were that of a man who had exited a deep, dark cave into a bright and unfriendly sun. I hope we still alive. I would hate to think your ugly self can follow me into the afterlife. Me follow you? I'll be going in a different direction than you on that day. What are we going to do now? Jonas didn't know the answer at the time, but they always found a way to make it. Always. However, being back in Chicago after so long was giving them doubts. They had grown up on the toughest streets the city had to offer. They had the very essence of the city flowing through their veins. But there seemed to be a different aroma in the air this time around, almost like a harsher wind. So I've been thinking, Jimmy started. Oh, Lord, Jonas interrupted. You know that's dangerous. What? I'll have you know that it's been my great ideas that have kept us alive all this time. Do tell. What about the time we had that big score? You remember that? Almost half a brick of that black tar. Right. We both got so sick from that cheap shit that we wanted to die just to stop the pain. What about that time we came up on the briefcase full of cash? It was my quick thinking that made that happen. Right. We did live it high on the hog until Disco found out it was us who lifted it from the stash house. Jimmy stopped for a second and just nodded his head. Well, hell, I guess you're right. That cash is what's got us up out of the shot in the first place. 10 years we've been gone. I ain't got nothing. He slumped down on the curb with his head buried in his chest. As much trouble as he had gotten the two in, Jonas hated to see his friend down. All right, Einstein, so what's your big idea? Jonas asked, looking down on Jimmy. Jimmy immediately lifted his head with a bright smile on his face. Okay, here it is. Let's jump on a train and head back to 79th Street. The look of pride made him look like a kid. Jonas scrunched his face and shook his head. Just the thought of 79th Street made his head hurt. 79th had been their old stomping grounds. They learned about life and music along the streets of Grand Crossing. The old music teacher, Mr. Watson, had taught them that loving their horns was like loving a woman. You do it slow and thoughtfully, or she'll bite. To go back seemed like torture, like coming face to face with the things that tormented you. Back south? 79? What if Disco finds out we back? We should have just stayed in Minnesota. Soda was too hot, you know that. What I figure is that it's been a lot of years. He may not even be the man anymore. You know how fast them dope boys be falling off? Here today, gone tomorrow. Jonas nodded. Yeah, but Disco wasn't your average dope boy. Don't forget about Daddy J. Daddy J was a mean old vet of the drug game on the South Side. He supplied everything from weed and pills to coke and heroin, all the way from Roosevelt down to Blue Island. There were 25 square miles of city blocks that he flooded with some of the most potent dope the city had ever known. He was deeply connected to the Italians. Some even say going back as far as Capone. But Jonas doubted that was true. Daddy J had built an empire, ran it until he was blind and senile before he finally left it to a spoiled brat son, Disco. Jimmy and Jonas had gone to school with Disco, and he vowed to hunt them down when he found out it was them who had stolen his 75 grand. He was always a mean fucker, Jimmy said. You remember that time he made Ben's old lady suck on that 45 to prove a point? That's some sick shit to make a man watch. All over a few $100. Shit, maybe we shouldn't even be in the city. Where else we got but Chi-Town? The only reason we went to Soda was because my uncle was there. I still got family and we always tight. My cousin Bo Peep will look out for us. I'm sure he's still down on 82nd. Bo Peep, huh? Yes, sir. You know, it's always a good time with old Bo. Jimmy laughed. Jonas rubbed his chin, tilted his head, and squinted his left eye. You know, that ain't a bad idea, not bad at all. Jimmy stood up victoriously, knowing that his place as the idea man of the duo was intact. I got $5. That's enough to get us down on the damn line. You mean the red line? Jonas correct. The red line. See, that's what's wrong with Chicago now. There wasn't nothing wrong with what it was called in the first place. Stuff changed too much. It confuses things. Let's get our black asses on the train, whatever it's called. The two ambled toward the subway entrance. They descended into the cool air of the tunnel. Been away from the South Side for too long. 79th gonna open up and hug us, man. I feel you on that. 79th and Cottage Grove, here we come. After the long ride, Jimmy and Jonas stood at the four corners of 79th and Cottage Grove. Even at 11:30 in the morning on a Wednesday, the activity was thick. Traffic swelled towards the lights, and floods of folk migrated from one corner to the next, stopping off at the currency exchange, the Paley Shoes, the Lee Scott liquor store, and the beauty supply. Jimmy smiled broadly and swayed excitedly while Jonas stood motionless. It's good to be home. 10 years, too long. I wonder if the Tiger Lounge is still open. Jonas didn't answer and took in all the corners had to give. There was a mixture of aromas in the air. Old chicken grease from Harold's and the musty onions from the Polish stands. Booming bass kneaded the atmosphere and shook his ribcage. Loose squares! Oh shit, that's OP right over there! I know that voice anywhere, Jimmy exclaimed. Just then, the horns blared as traffic headed east and west. All of a sudden, hit an invisible wall. Coming due south was a white hearse, followed by a white limo and a parade of cars with orange stickers in the upper right corners of their windshields. When the limo that carried the family passed by, Jonas looked into the back and saw a beautiful, honey-complexioned sister, young and sad. Her plump, round cheeks glistened from crying. He knew that love. Not knowing who was to be laid to rest, his heart fell to the pit of his stomach. Death always did that to him. The limo sped up, followed by an endless stream of various cars. Some things never change, he whispered. Jimmy paid no attention and began to cross to the left. Jonas didn't move for a second. The don't walk orange man of the stoplight began to flash, and Jonas's feet let go of the concrete. He followed behind his friend, and the doubts about the move back to 79th Street ran through his head like squirrels in an attic. Jonas stepped over a massive crack in the street and wished he was back under the cross of God's precious love. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Where can we find more of your work?
You know what? This is coming out in September, and you can go to my website. Matter of fact, everybody in here, just like me on Facebook, come join me on Facebook, be my friend on Facebook. Author Tony Bowers, send me a friend request, and then I'll keep you up to date that way.
Okay, let's give it up for Tony.